Welcome back to the Church of Doom, brothers and sisters. Today we're continuing our cover-to-cover read of the new 2024 DMG. We are in Chapter 2, Running the Game, and in today's video we're looking at Part 1, Know Your Players, and we're going to kind of go through the actor, the explorer, the fighter, the instigator, the optimizer. There's a couple other on the next page we'll go through too, and not only am I going to tell you kind of what the book says here, I'll summarize what are those players and what do they like, but I'm going to give you my own experience and my tips and advice on how to engage with those players and how to prep around those types of players. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can catch, all future parts of Chapter 2 and all the other future chapters of the DMG. And without further ado, let us pray. First, though, I think it's important that we read this note that I made down below. Set the expectation that you will reward players with cool outcomes when they initiate desired actions. That was a very, very big paradigm shift for me when I was DMing, that if I wanted to have my players come back to the table and I wanted them to be proactive, I didn't want them to just react to the things that I was throwing at them. I wanted to kind of see them take the reins of the story, right? Then the easiest way to do that is to give them a carrot, not a stick. If you've got players who love the acting part and you're not super into it, I hate to tell you this, but you got to find a way to enjoy it a little bit. And for me, one way that I've kind of given more structure to the acting part of the game, just kind of now jumping into one of these examples here, is that I got this advice from Runehammer. I play role-playing encounters in initiative order still pretty often because it allows me to get a little more time to think about how the NPCs react, and also I can have specific outcomes to specific characters' actions in that role-playing encounter. On to the actual player types, though. You've got your actor. When I play, this is me. As a DM, I don't really do very well with this, strangely enough. But as a player, I love getting so into the mind of my character that, my DM could throw me any scenario, and I would know exactly how my character would react, right? That annoying thing, that's what my character would do. I'm kind of that player, but not from an evil sense. So if you don't really get this part of the game, have that maybe in your head. It's that's what my character would do, but in a good way. They want to know that they can interact with NPCs and talk to them and maybe bounce their problems off of a random stranger in the tavern bar, right? It could be their problems with the romance they're trying to do in the game, or it could be a problem with fighting the Lich. That's kind of what's so fun about the role-playing part, at least for me, or getting to be an actor, is you get to just throw out some lines into the world, like some dialogue lines, and just see what gets thrown back at you. And it's so fun. And a little tip here for any DM who's not great at the acting part, I would say keep in mind that you're not the spotlight character. That is your players. If you feel like you get a little nervous in a role-playing encounter as the DM, then you want to keep that spotlight going onto the players as often as you can so you're not in it. And a great way to do that is have your NPCs ask questions. A lot of times the players go to an NPC because they want to ask a question and get information out of them, right? Or they have a resource and they need to go speak to them. But once that question has kind of been proposed by the party, then you get to be the one who starts to ask the questions. Why do you need it? Why should I trust you? What are you going to do with it? How did you find out that I have it? I'm kind of in this one example of the party goes to get a resource from somebody. But that's just advice for normal human interactions too, right? Just if you ask a lot of questions, people tend to like to talk about themselves. So let your players talk about themselves. Next, they talk about the explorer, the players who want to learn every little bit about your world that they possibly can. Or actually, it doesn't even have to be your world. It could be the dungeon chamber that the party is in. The explorers are just going to be the ones, they were the kids who turned over every rock to look at every little insect that could be under there, right? Now that I'm kind of getting that as an example, I'm realizing, I'm kind of a little bit of this too. Especially when I'm designing a room as a GM, I love to put all kinds of little things in every spot, or at least have them in the back of my mind, right? I don't put every idea down on paper, but I like to reward this kind of stuff. Maybe that's how I'd say it. As a DM, this is the easiest and most fun type of player to reward, I think, because anytime they make an investigation check, you just get to do a little micro moment of world building and come up with something. If they're opening a drawer in the noble's room and you didn't expect them to be here in the first place, great. Now you get to do some world building about what weird treaty this noble is working on. That's fun and the player's going to love it. And if the idea of needing to come up with something on the fly every time your players ask a question is terrifying to you, I totally get that. There's lots of players of D&D out there who are the exact same way. So a tip for you would be, oftentimes Yeah, like very rarely are you going to have a player who is curious about everything. More often, you're going to have the wizard who is very interested in transmutation magics, and so any opportunity you have to sprinkle a little clue about the origins of transmutation magics, or the frontline crazy out there theories about how that magic works, right? Like those are examples of little things you can throw into your world to reward that specific player's form of exploration. That player's not going to care about the lore of the dragon, demon, giant army, right? I mean, maybe they will because they're a wizard, but for the most part, you don't need to like worry about that. You can just focus in your prep on giving them what their character wants. My other favorite part of the game, fighting. I think all of us have a little bit of us in there, and it's often our first exposure to the hobby is the goblin ambush and you fight them, right? Or the bandits or whatever. So they give examples of do the random combat encounters, vividly describe their havoc. I highlighted that because, that's my favorite part of the game. Like just last night, I was running a one-shot where a bunch of zombies are like making their way into the inn. And it was a fun adventure. It was for a duo, a husband and wife. And the wizard character wanted to cast Thunder Wave to blow a bunch of these zombies back that were closing in on them. And so the way I described they did the spell was with their boot, they kicked down the edge of this table so that it kind of flipped up flat to them. And then they hit that with the Thunderwave spell, and it caught all the zombies and slammed them into the wall, and they just saw their guts like spill out the side like a big bug being crushed. That kind of description, oh my god. I think it's just any player's going to love that, but the fighters especially, that's how you put the cherry on it. A tip, if you think fighting slows down the game though, or you just find it kind of boring to just run a bunch of monsters, right? A tip for you to make this part of your prep is you don't need a lot of enemies to make an encounter interesting. You can put, one owlbear in the combat encounter, but then incorporates that fight is now on a big tree that has fallen over a river, and it's going to collapse. That log could break if the owlbear spends too much time on it. You can also then think about, what's down in the river? Are there like swarms of piranhas for some reason? Maybe it's like a big parrot owlbear. It's like a tropical river with rapids and things or sharp rocks. And then you've got, of course, you've got the canopy above that has some strangle vines that you can try and swing through, or maybe bait them into pulling up the owlbear, right? I'm just throwing out, I just made that up right now in my head, but that's an example of how you can engage fighting characters. If you're more of a like world building DM and you like the exploration side, just merge those two into one encounter. Now we have reached a player description that I disagree with quite a bit, and personally I don't know if there's a bunch of strengths to having this type of player at the table. It reminds me of that Always Sunny episode where Charlie's like the wild card, and it's like nobody wants a wild card. It's like unreliable. And this is also where that saying I used earlier under the act of like, that's what my character would do. That is often the justification for an instigator character. How I would have pitched this type of player to you guys if I were writing this book was like, the instigator is the one who makes sure that nothing comes to a screeching halt in a session. If things are getting a little slow, then they will help push things along. They will go do the thing that needs to be done, or they'll be like, we got to come up with a plan. Like, what are we doing? We can't be in the market all day. The Baron is apparently fleeing the town. Like, what are we doing? Right? That's what I think of an instigator, not the like feisty NPCs. And then right after that is one that has a bad rep and is one that I'm definitely not this type of player. I don't enjoy it, but it's one that I've kind of come to have more appreciation for. The optimizer or the power player, right? They want to actually, hold on, I'm going to flip the page, 1 second. Okay, right, so these are the players that want to use their spells and their gear and their abilities in the best possible way that they can to have the most impact. And I guess here's how I see it. I think every player wants that. Everybody wants to be as good as they can be, of course, but because it's a role-playing game and we're only human and we've got these character sheets that are pretty complex, it just takes a lot of effort to, like, mental power to be able to put all of that together sometimes, right? And that's, I think, a big reason of why I don't really engage with it very much on my end as a player. It's just like, I'm just going to do the cool fireball spell, and I'm going to do it there where it seems narratively interesting, not there where it might hit one more extra creature in its range, right? But I do think as a DM, if you take on the responsibility of just kind of in your head always like trying to make sure that you're helping your characters, you're throwing them a bone, or the players, right? Being like, hey, maybe you could pair that with this, or don't forget you have this item, then everybody's just going to be more happy at the table if you do that. The problem-solving one is another place where the description's a little odd to me. It kind of feels like they almost describe more of like the paranoid player of like, insight check, don't touch anything, what's gonna happen if we do this, like that's more of what I'm like kind of picturing in my head with this character. But I think it's just like the puzzle doer, right? They want to make sure that everything kind of makes sense in the world, that they're not. And part of this I do think is still rooted in the paranoia of like, what if we're wasting time? What if we think this is what the villain wants, but they actually want this, and we're falling right into their trap? Like, it's a good type of player to have at the table, because it prevents what happens in a lot of games, I find, of just like players kind of end up somewhere and they're like, why are we here? What are we doing? Like, I forget why we came to this dungeon. The problem solver, the puzzle doer, is the one who's like, we are here to find the Emerald of Elemental Containment to bring it back to the wizard who unleashed the fire elemental. It's like, all right, yeah, that was like forever ago. That's kind of what I see here. And the very best tip I can give you to help the puzzle solver have fun at the table, and in turn help kind of everybody, I think, have more fun and feel a sense of progress, is to give them answers. This is something I was horrible at when I was first getting into DMing, was I felt like all of my dirty little secrets about the BBG's motives or the crazy things that are going to happen later in the campaign, I kept them all to myself. I felt like I wanted to wait to reveal it until the second to last session. But guess what? That session never fucking happened, because everybody got so bored or just didn't feel like anything was happening. They were making no progress, that it kind of just fell apart. So I wish, and I have now, been so much better about, like, if I have a cool idea, guess what? You're going to find out about it pretty damn quickly, because I also want to see it at the table. It's not just I'm holding on to it to see your faces go, whoa, when you learn it. Like, I think it's going to be fun to run, so I want to work it into my game. The socializing player, they note, is the one who shows up because they just want to hang out with their friends. They don't necessarily care about any of these other parts. They're not there to get super into the role or be a problem solver or create the most powerful barbarian they can. They're just there to hang out. And it's sort of like beers and pretzels D&D, which I think can be super fun, especially if that is the expectation that is set going into it. If you just make sure everybody knows, guess what, guys, like, we're just here to run a crazy one-shot and fight a Cyclops, and hopefully nobody dies, and it's just going to be awesome, then this player is going to have a ton of fun. And I think actually the best way to engage them is probably with one-shots, because in my opinion, at my table, players who don't bring it to my groups tend to not only not have a bunch of fun, they kind of feel a lot of pressure on them. At the same time, they kind of detract from everybody else's fun, because my table, I just tend to attract the really engaged players. And that's not a shot at them. That's just the reality of the situation, I think. And then I'll just be honest, this last one, the storyteller, it just says like, these are the players who like to be really involved in the story and be woven into it and have meaningful impacts. I kind of feel like I don't think this is a player type, because I don't think any player would have fun at a role-playing game if they felt like their actions didn't mean anything, or if they didn't feel like they were living in a real world, right? If you're just like, the opposite of this type of player is an NPC. They're just kind of there and they're just hanging out, and nobody wants to be that, and a DM doesn't want to run a table for a bunch of NPCs. So everything they say here is super, super valuable as a DM. Like, you absolutely want to make sure that your players are driving the narrative and impacting the world, but that doesn't mean that they have to be like continent shaking, kingdom raising consequences. If they just want to run a tavern, that's fine, but this all still applies to whatever scale of story you're trying to tell, to every player, I think. And that's it for part 1 of chapter 2 in the new 2024 DMG. Don't forget to subscribe, because next time we're looking at part 2, group size. All right, what do you do if your group is really small? What if it's really big? Guess what? It's not the size that matters, it's the quality of the players. Also, if you've got players that have to miss or drop out of sessions, how to bring in new players, all of those types of super, super common problems is what we're going to address in the next video. So, again, thank you for watching. Love y'all. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. And we say these things in their unholy names. Amen.